Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And we are here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty does work for you. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I am so delighted that you're returning back with me. And I just want to let you know that we are in the Facebook countdown. It's first and foremost very important. I said that we will be off by the end of August, so I have even posted up on Facebook, target date, September 1st to be gone. I have mentioned over and over that we are moving everything, started a whole new media company, and that the environment that we're going to is eaglefirepost.com. And Eagle Fire Post is a new media environment, including the social media component to it. It is valued at a latte a month, so it's basically $5 a month. And until you give me some feedback, so I'm hoping that you listeners on here, that you will actually take and email me at tom@samueladamsreturns.com, or you can email me at tomn@liberatormediallc.com and let me know, what do you think about what our founders did when they came up against the great oligarchs of industry during their period and time. And that is a program that I'm going to do next week, because that'll be the final week before absolutely getting off of Facebook. And the idea, so I'm planting the seed, is what our founding fathers did when they had the oligarchy of none other than those, they were the media giants, but more so the mercantile giants. And what we have in these techno oligarchs isn't just the idea that, we have all of this issues going on with banning and conservative and all of that, and attacking our liberties and freedoms with their ideology. In fact, I saw an article that was out this morning on, I forget the Hill or somewhere, that, you have Zuckerberg and his wife, Chan, donating millions and millions of dollars towards their ideological campaigns, with the expectation that those will be in locations to have that greater impact for their ideologies. Now, what our founders did, when you had the mercantile movement of the day imposing restrictions on the freedoms and liberties of the people of the colonies, such that they could not trade except for that one trading body and company out of England, they said, time out. That doesn't work for us. We want fair trade. We want to be able to trade with other partners. We want to be able to go for the best pricing, not what the East India Trading Company was doing. So in essence, the East India Trading Company was the foremost entity there in England that was actually being supported by the government. So when it came right down to it, let's think about it. Facebook and all of that, they've received a great amount of government funding through either DOD or DOE, not so much DOE, but other agencies, if you will. So that's not just Facebook, but it is also with Amazon. It's also with all of these other ones, that they have become such behemoths that the competition isn't there, but they have a lot of government contracts. So if you take then and you use even the basic form of logic, which, maybe you here on this programming use the basic forms of logic called common sense. And, Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. I think maybe go reread that. But what Samuel Adams did by taking and helping form the committees of correspondence, what they did in Massachusetts in particular was the non-importation agreements between the colonies. And with those non-importation agreements with the colonies and that, what did they do? just to refresh your memory, what they did is they quit buying things. They quit buying tea. They quit buying cloth. They quit buying all of those other items that were being foisted on them, and they were paying the high tariffs. They were losing their liberty around, and they started their own industrial way of doing it. So instead of all, and I'm going to write an open letter to Ann Coulter and some of these other big mouths that are out there in the so-called conservative media. And the point is that we do not need government to go in and start dictating to private industry, because that's fascism, and we already have enough fascism in America. That, yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I've wrote about that before, and I'm going to be writing more about it. This American fascism is in place and has been so since the 1913 time frame. We've had American fascism. So what we need to do, instead of saying, oh, we need our First Amendment rights imposed on all these private industry, the answer is simple. The answer is no. The answer is you quit looking for something for free. Because as you well know, it's not free. And you know what? If we had the different and right people that we could understand who they are, and that's really why EagleFirePost.com is a for-pay site, is because the administrators take a look at all of the different people that want to participate in the site, to the extent that you have to be approved as you come on. And there's a value proposition that has to go with that. So the point really being isn't just to promote EagleFirePost.com, but is to take and say that the way that you stop Zuckerberg and all of these others from pouring millions of dollars into these liberal agenda items, these fascist agenda items, these new forms of feudalism agenda items, is that what you need to do is that you need to take and get off the platforms and quit supporting them, because that hurts them in the pocketbook. That's exactly what the founders did with the non-importation agreements amongst the colonies. They stood up and said, even the ladies said they would no longer buy tea, because they knew what value that was for liberty and what value that was to stand strong on principles. So that's the real challenge to everybody out there, and even you who listen to Liberty Works Radio Network. The real challenge is, are you principled sufficiently to get off of the enemy's platforms and quit allowing them to use your information, develop their numbers and their marketing? Because every time they lose subscribers, every time Zuckerberg loses subscribers, it hits him personally in the pocketbook, because then he's not making the numbers that they're projecting to Wall Street for the growth of the network. Now, therefore, we can say, first off, Zuckerberg is taking and, yes, influencing elections by putting millions of dollars into the ideological areas that he chooses to do. Have wealthy people done that for years and years and years? Yeah, and we all do it. That's called, to an extent, citizen lobbyist. But if he didn't have that money, if he didn't have that capacity to do that, yeah, wow, wouldn't that be interesting? So yeah, we're picking on Zuckerberg, but don't forget Amazon, don't forget, you know, some of the others that are out there, the Googles, the Oogles, the Boogles. You know, there's all of that. Can we build alternatives? There's enough smart people out there that can. Will we? I don't know. You know, I'm one of those guys that's a risk taker, and That's why I do what I do here. That's why I've taken business risks all my life, and why I'm doing what I'm doing now with Liberator Media, which is what Eagle Fire Post is a subsidiary of. Yeah, so I'm standing on my principles. I'm getting off Facebook by the end of August. We'll talk about that even more. I've taken up just about this whole segment in doing that. And what we really want to get to is Federalist number 10 and jump more on that. Well, what do we have, Kath? About 4 or 5 minutes? We have about 4 minutes left in this very first segment. And where I want to go with that is that the real critical issue that's out there for everyone in every state, and mostly here in the state of Ohio is where we've been dealing with it, and specifically in the northeast corner of Ohio, out of the 9 counties that make up northeast Ohio, we've taken a hard look at levies. We've taken a hard look at what is attacking us in this upcoming election. I mean, I got beat to death financially. Kathy and I did here in the midterms. I mean the primaries, because we had a school levy come upon us that is egregious. It wiped out the savings that we were able to garner for our house payment. But now this levy and several of the other levies that are coming at us in November are not only going to match and take away all those dollar differences, but we have a countywide levy coming up that is going to exceed our savings. If you're not upset about how these levies are attacking you, boy, you should take a good hard look at it, because I'm telling you right now, every levy in every taxing district out there in the state of Ohio, as well as every other state across this country, is unsustainable and unaffordable. And I'm telling you right now, millennials, you know what? This is you. You can't even buy a house. You can't even get into the types of things that you want to, because you are already encumbered with debt out the kazoo. And you Z generation folks, I'm telling you right now, you are the ones that are not going to benefit from these levies as the emotional pushers. They're like drug pushers. You know, these people that promote these levies do it for the general good and for all the emotional positions. Oh, it's about the children for schools. Oh, it's about this for libraries. Oh, it's about this for mental health. Oh, it's about this for health. Oh, it's about this. Oh, if you don't do this, then you don't love the people. No, ladies and gentlemen, they are no different than a drug pusher, is who these people are that promote levies without any rational reasons behind it, and they're impacting every dollar that you may save. And all of us that may be on limited incomes, those that are, or over 65, guess what? You're impacted the most. So anyway, in Federalist number 10, Madison kind of talks about that, taking it and saying, first off, all of that type of taxation and everything shouldn't be part of the national scheme. What it should be is at that state and local level. And so he talks about the local taxation by the apportionment of taxes on the various descriptions of property is an act which seems to require the most exact impartiality. He goes on to say, yet there is, perhaps, no legislative act in which greater opportunity and temptation are given to a predominant party to trample on the rules of justice. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hit that right off the bat. We touched that a little bit last week, and we're going to jump right back into that and start there in Federalist number 10 when we come back into the next segment, because it's about your liberty. And so, you know, get off of Facebook, hit them in the pocketbook. You know what? There's other alternatives. If you don't want to come to eaglefirepost.com, then I suggest you take and you look at some of the other alternatives. There's other patriots out there that are starting sites. Take a look at what they're doing. Support your liberty in media. Come on back for the next segment of Samuel Adams Returns, because the Anti-Federalists, they got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They got it right. And what we're talking about here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where that liberty, it works for you, and me being Tom Navolis, your host, is that as we look at what's happening in our present day, that our founders really had it in mind. You know, maybe not the exact specifics. Did they have social media in mind? Did they have that technology in mind? No. But as I talked about last week, we absolutely understand that what Madison was writing about, he talked about manufacturing interest, the merchant interest, the moneyed interest. He talked about all of these other types of issues and interests in Federalist number 10, to the extent that said, you know what, you can have factions in every area you will, and in a good republic, they're absolutely necessary to the extent that they are functional and that we have a mechanism by which we take and can maintain that balance. And we left the last segment talking about taxation. And local taxation in particular. I mean, we left that last segment talking about levies and how those are unaffordable, and how we know that government in general, even at the national level, because they have imposed more on us than was ever intended, to the extent that, you know what, I hope Trump does really shut the government down to build the wall. But that's another point in a few moments. But what I want you to do, too, when we talk about funding something, really take a look at Liberty Works Radio Network. And you know what? I do every time, every week in this second segment, say, you know what? Would you please go hit that donate button? It's the only way that we can get away from everything that the techno-oligarchs are doing. It's the only way that we can take and support these activities, is to try and free up some of our disposable income in such a manner that they aren't making it, they aren't taking it. And I'm all about fair enterprise. I'm all about what it means to have, businesses. I'm a business guy. Come on. You know, I'm someone that started business. I've been an executive in business and all of that. So I know what it takes and what is there. But we need to return to moral businesses. Well, stop. Stop right there. So here's the issue. Even with Federalist number 10, we talked about who was Madison's teacher of the day. We were talking about what is it in that idea of moral philosophy. We look at all of the various writings that are out there, and let's see, what is morality in business? What is morality in general that it allows for good governance? Those are the types of things that Madison was talking about in Federalist number 10. And we had to understand Madison, we talked about last week, please go and look at it, as we talked about his mentor and his teacher, John Witherspoon, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and who lectured extensively at Princeton on the whole idea of moral philosophy and morality. So to understand what Madison is writing in Federalist number 10, you have to understand the lectures that he sat in and understood relative to morality and what it is. You know, and there's nothing new. Always, I say this. No, first off, I have really no new words. I'm kind of putting my thought processes on words that have been spoken before, but have been written before. You know, my two books up here, I call them anthologies because the majority of them aren't my words. You know, I'm straight up. I'll tell you that. You know, it's not about plagiary. It's about, you know, if I missed a reference or two, I apologize for that. But the fact of the matter is, other people have already had these conversations and thought these things through. But we have to, like in the old days, you know, we didn't have a lot of books way back when. So a lot of it was done by storytelling and making sure those stories were pretty accurate over time as much as could be. we don't even begin to tell the stories. So when I take a look at what's going on, and we're talking about Federalist number 10, we mentioned that whole idea of taxation being that which was local taxation, and that how it was apportioned. And then we go into the whole idea here of, again, the vanity that comes about within the perspective of legislators, those that get elected. And a hard push that I did last week, because I got to jump back and then we're going to move forward, is that there is a cause and effect in everything. In everything. So Madison talks about it is vain to say that enlightened statesmen will be able to adjust these clashing interests and render them all subservient to the public good. We see that all over the place. That's what makes legislative activities extremely difficult yet important. And that's why he talks about in here why our republic and the principles of republicanism inside federalism are absolutely critical in who we are as a people and as a nation. Because you know what? We don't have enlightened statesmen anymore. There may be a couple of them out there, but not really. He goes, enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm. Duh, you think? Geez, isn't that our reality? We don't have that. Nor, in many cases, can such an adjustment be made at all without taking into view indirect and remote considerations, which will rarely prevail over the immediate interest which one party may find in disregarding the rights of another or the good of the whole. So that's what we're seeing with all these antifas, the socialists, the communists, the Democrats in particular are anti-American, they're anti-constitutionalism, they're anti-republican principles, the principles of republicanism, not the political party, get it right, because the Republicans, that being the Republican Party, is not necessarily for the principles of republicanism or federalism. That's why you have the establishment Republicans. That's why you have them fighting the way they do. Anyway, so with that, with what he was saying is that these folks that necessarily, these enlightened statesmen that won't be there, they're going to have a heck of a time, making any forms of adjustments, and actions have consequences. The interference to which we are brought is that the causes of faction cannot be removed, and that relief is only to be sought in means of controlling the effects. Cause and effect. How do you deal with that? Wow. How do you deal with the causes that happen with Antifa? You have to deal with the effects. What happened with the statue being torn down? You know what? You have a black man dressed up in Confederate uniform and a Confederate flag standing there and talking truth. Talking truth. Go check that one out on Twitter or YouTube. I think it's up on YouTube. Anyway, so he goes on talking about these factions consist of less than a majority. So if a faction is less than a majority, relief is supplied by the Republican principle, which enables the majority to defeat its sinister views by a regular vote. Hey, that's what we have going on. That's what we have to do and keep going after the socialist, communist, leftist factions, the Zuckerbergers and all of the rest of them that are promoting ideologies that are contrary to these views. So the Republican principle then allows the majority, and the majority really being all of us who are truly constitutionally minded, to stop the sinister action. Okay? It may clog the administration, it may convulse the society, but it will be unable to execute and mask its violence under the forms of the Constitution. That's why they want to get rid of the Constitution. That's why they want to destroy the First Amendments. That's why they want to destroy everything that are the core principles of our Constitution is because the Constitution keeps away and holds back the torrent of tyranny and despotism and immorality that is there and what we see at our present time. Then it goes on to say, when a majority is induced in a faction or included in a faction, the form of popular government, on the other hand, enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passions or interests both the public good and the rights of other citizens, to secure the public good and private rights against the dangers of a faction, and at the same time to preserve the spirit and the form of popular government is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed. That's the whole purpose of what's going on here in Federalist number 10. Let me add that it is the great desideratum, which means something that is needed or wanted. So it is the great need by which this form of government can be rescued. And the opprobrium under which, and what that means is the disgrace. So the disgrace that's there, and that this form of government can be rescued from the disgrace under which it has so long labored and be recommended to the esteem and adoption of mankind. So right there, we're looking at several things that our Constitution does within the context of maintaining factions in some sense of control over the effects, over the causes that are out there. And what that is that what we're trying to do and what the Constitution can do if it's properly in operation, to which the Anti-federalists said, what we have today in this very present time would occur because if you don't have the moral and virtuous people that even Madison said we needed to have, and the enlightened statesmen, which he acknowledged we necessarily wouldn't have all the time, if we didn't have all of that, then what we have to deal with is that we have to deal with the great need by which a form of government can be rescued from the disgrace under which it has so long labored. And the disgraces under which we're laboring today are the disgraces of American fascism, which some people call liberalism, socialism, whatever you want, but because of the way that businesses are controlled, you are controlled, as well as how our liberties are affected throughout all those things that Madison talked about, the manufacturing interest, the mercantile interest, the moneyed interest, every one of those is impacted by the courts in particular, but by laws of Congress such that we have, in effect, American fascism in operation instead of constitutionalism. So to bring back the principles of republicanism, that's what this program's about. That's why we have to stand up on these principles and fight what is going on in the social media realm by impacting those people in the pocketbook. Now, have they divested themselves in such a way that maybe personally they're not going to lose a lot of money? True. But will their businesses, will the Facebooks, the Googles, all of them be impacted if we start looking at other places and other ways to do our business? Absolutely. But do we have the guts and gumption to do that? You know, I got to tell you, from interacting with a lot of the people on Facebook as I'm leaving it, I have to say no. I have to say that everybody wants to wear the Patriot hat, make America great, but they don't have the guts to fight like Donald Trump. They don't have, and I don't know who you are, but you don't have the guts. If you had the guts to do it, you'd be emailing me, you'd be supporting Samuel Adams' return, and you'd be supporting Liberty Works Radio Network. You know what? Those are the real guts. You'd be having the guts to get out there and fight those various levies that are going on. You have the guts to get back into your tea parties. You have the guts to stand up as citizens. You know what? Do I have to go lower than that in the anatomy? No. You have to have the guts, the intestinal fortitude. That's what our founder said. So go back and read those last lines of the Declaration of Independence as we come back, when Samuel Adams returns, because the Anti-Federalists, they did. They got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they did. They got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty is working for you if you do something about it. You know, we have to be, there's a friend of mine around here that runs a church called the Doers of the Word. Matter of fact, he's on Liberty Works Radio Network, Pastor Ernie Sanders, so he has his programs on here as well. He's an interesting guy, and I'll tell you what, he gets some really interesting people on. So, yeah, I'm plugging Pastor Ernie's program a little bit, but the point is you have to be what he says, doers of the word. And that goes back to what Witherspoon was talking about. We have to be a moral and virtuous people. In fact, he was, in his lectures on moral philosophy, he was defining here after going through them, and some of the things that we see and we know is that there's nothing new under the sun. So the arguments that Hume was making on what is the scheme of morality, you know, and that he says, what did he say here? David Hume has a scheme of morals that is peculiar to himself. He makes everything that is agreeable and useful virtuous, and vice versa, by which he entirely annihilates the difference between natural and moral qualities, making health, strength, cleanliness as really virtues as integrity and truth. So you can make up a lot of stuff, and that's what we have, that's what we've seen. And so the battle of defining morality and virtue is nothing new. You know, Witherspoon wrote this during the times that he was president and a lecturer and a pastor at Princeton. Gee, Princeton nowadays, holy smokes, Yale, all of them, you know what? They're cesspools. Universities are nothing but cesspools. But talking about that, he goes through all this thing about all these authors and where they're talking about piety, and they all have these different systems of philosophy, and they have these different systems of talking about morality and virtue. But one of the things that they don't do is they don't wrap it up in the context of who all of humanity is and where our origins are from. Again, there you had those that were coming up with all these other fake origins, that there's no God, there's nothing there. We had the Scottish Enlightenment coming forth in such a way. But one of the things that I have to say that I like here is in talking about that after natural religion is established on general proofs, it will remain to point out what are its laws, which, not taking in revelation, must bring us back to consider our own nature and the rational deductions from it. I mean, at the very beginning, you know, what is natural law? He talks about that. He talks about what is the nature of man, what is the nature of you and I as human beings, from the form of being created, from the sovereign God, or out of the imaginations of men and just what they want to pretend is there in the physical universe. So one of the things that he's talking about here is the opinions on the foundation of virtue may be summed up in the following, in the four following points. 1, the will of God. 2, the reason and nature of things. 3, the public interest. And 4, private interest. And then he goes on to talk about those very specifically, but he takes a lot of time to talk about the will of God, and that virtue and morality has to have some fundamental definitions. And yes, it's only black and white. And what I mean by black and white, so that nobody says I'm discriminatory, what I mean by black and white is that it has specific definition to the words. And the words have their point of origin from the truths of the Bible. So that's that. And then we get back into understanding that that was the mind of Madison, understanding what virtue and morality is and defined, and how that comes into the public sphere based on just, you go read this. Go read what Witherspoon wrote on moral philosophy in society. So Madison continues on talking about that from the last segment that we were looking at, that we have to have something wanted that's necessary, that by which this form of government can be rescued from the disgraces that we've seen there. And that's the purpose of the Constitution, is to continuously bring us back and rescue us from all these insanities that are going on around us. Let's face it. That's what they are. And the evils that are out there, and we've talked about that, and they're protracted. They're going to continue because ultimately, if you haven't gotten it from other programs that I've done, is that this is always in a continuum of the battle of good and evil, and God wins. God created us. He wins, and we have to fight against evil. You have to fight against evil in prayer. You have to fight against evil in just the whole essence of your spirit before the living God, and accepting the fact that there's only one salvation. It's not going to come through Hume or other philosophers. It's not going to come through ideologies that Zuckerberg is going to throw his money at. No, it only comes through recognizing the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. That's it. You have to understand it, come to it, and then you got to fight. Be doers of the word, okay? You just don't give in, especially in our republic. And as I've said before, and I don't want to get off this too far, is that there's so many pastors out there that do not understand what Republican principles are, and that we as citizens in America are required. Those of you that are just listening on the radio haven't seen me move my face almost directly into the lens so you can see my lips moving underneath my mustache. And what I'm saying is to all you pastors out there that living in America and being a citizen of the United States and a citizen of the state in which you reside, guess what? It is required. It is required that you participate in this nation and in the Republican principles under the Constitution and federalism. Okay, enough of that. We'll continue on with Federalist number 10. And what we have here, because Kathy knows I can go off, and you guys know that I can go off a long time on that one. Let's see. All of a sudden, Madison starts asking some questions. So he asks this question. By what means is this object attainable? Meaning, the want of government to fight those disgraces. Evidently, and he answers the question from his perspective. And that being, evidently, by one of two only. So there's only one answer out of two possibilities. Either the existence of the same passion or interest in a majority at the same time must be prevented, or the majority having such coexistent passion or interest must be rendered by their number and local situation, remember a lot of it's local, unable to concert and carry into effect schemes of oppression. Okay, there's your either or, all right? If the impulse and the opportunity to be suffered to coincide, we well know that neither moral nor religious motives can be relied on as an adequate control. This goes to what he learned from Witherspoon, in that there's so many issues in that, and so many denominational differences, and so many different teachings, and so much, especially in modern philosophical horsepucky, that, moral nor religious motives can be relied on to control these passions of men. Personally, they should. Personally, that's what self-governance is about. Personally, if you really had the law of God written on your heart, then guess what? You'd have it. So he goes on and says, they are not found to be such on the injustice and violence of individuals, and lose their efficacy in the proportion to the number combined together, that is, in the proportion as their efficacy becomes needful. And efficacy, for you that, I like defining words for you, means the ability to produce a desired or intended result. Okay? So what's the intended result? We talked about that earlier, that causes have effects. And we're getting down to the end of the program. So one of the things that we're going to get into, especially next week, because we are way not done with this, and we're going to talk about what is a pure democracy, and that the idea of a democracy does not function. And that what I want to leave you with is that, kind of what I said a few minutes ago, is that to understand our required involvement in this republic, be it, first off, every state is its own republic. That's why every state has its own constitution. And that if we understand what it means to be a citizen within our state, and then a generalized citizen, is that we have to participate. And we know that when what Madison's dealing here with is factions. So we can see the factions that are going on in our modern times, and we can see that, some of it, people's heads are spinning in all directions, and the spin doctors, on no matter what program out there, they don't help any, they contribute to the spin. Understanding the fundamental principles is what we have to drive back to bring any reasonable effect back into governance. It has to start with self-governance. And that self-governance can only come with true liberty. And as I mentioned before, the only way you're going to understand true liberty, which Madison understood by, and I'm holding it up here, reading and going through what Witherspoon taught, true liberty only comes from that personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Because Jesus says, I'm here to set you free. So when you have to bring that, you have to think, you have to render it down, you have to put the pieces together. And to the extent that there's a lot of pastors out there that say God's law is written on your heart, then you need to act accordingly. And what that means is that even within every faction that's out there, being mercantile, business, whatever, or whatever it might be, there's factions out the kazoo. You have your special interest. The point is, where are you morally adjusted within that? What does it mean for the greater good? We can talk about that in so many different ways. Where Madison is driving to it very, very heartfully is that, maybe morality and maybe, being of a religious nature isn't going to help anything, isn't going to have an effect. But what we have to drive back to is what are the fundamental principles under which we will be governed. What is government? What does it mean to be governed? And it starts, as I said earlier, it's all about self-governance. Getting ready to wrap up here. And then it comes out to what's the ultimate outcome. Are you going to be selfish? Do we look at the greater good? What does that mean? Madison's going to talk about it. We'll talk about it not next week, because I'm really going to focus on pulling out of social media next week and all the reasons why, and statistically and everything else. But what we are going to do when we jump back into this is we are going to talk about why democracy does not work, why a constitutional democracy does not work, why the only thing that fundamentally can work and has worked and hopefully will continue to work is a constitutional republic with federalism in full effect, which we don't have going on in America anymore, because we have the senators that are being directly elected instead of the 17th Amendment screwed up so many things. So many things are screwed up because we haven't followed the principles of the founders, and selfish, immoral, and not virtuous leaders have been in effect for quite a long time. So come on back. We'll talk more about this in a couple weeks relative to Federalist number 10. But I think we need to have, again, that serious discussion about social media and how to impact it in such a way that it makes a dynamic change in how we address liberty. Get out there and fight. Get out there and get involved. Come on back next week when Samuel Adams returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right.